need to act now.
Okay.
Your responsibility is to facilitate that action.
Yes, I do, and I'll do everything, that you need.
All I know is that I was working and then Sandra came and told me that I stole some lady's money. That is everything that I know.
Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and managers infringing on your rights. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Compliance. This 2012 thriller follows a fast food worker who is accused of theft by a caller claiming to be a police officer, and she's subjected to increasingly harsh and humiliating forms of interrogation by her manager. Compliance was written and directed by Craig Zobel, who has brought us things like Mayor of Easttown, The Hunt, and the upcoming Penguin miniseries. The script was closely inspired by a real-life incident that took place in Kentucky in 2004, as well as years of related crimes that went largely unnoticed. I'll wait until after the film breakdown to compare it to what really happened, but it's a pretty horrifying story. The film stars Dreama Walker from Gran Torino and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as Becky, the accused employee. Ann Dowd from Hereditary and The Exorcist Believer as the manager Sandra. Pat Healy from Killers of the Flower Moon and Zobel's directorial debut, Great World of Sound, as the caller, Officer Daniels. And Bill Camp from Joker and The Killing of a Sacred Deer as Sandra's boyfriend Van. Cinematography was handled by Adam Stone from Take Shelter and the Ted Bundy tapes, and the score was composed by Heather McIntosh from Princess Sid and The Art of Self-Defense. Compliance premiered at Sundance and then went on to have a super tiny theatrical release. It apparently just had a tiny budget of $270,000, so its box office total of $800,000 was actually a bit of a success. It was also met with pretty positive reviews from critics who found it to be a good mix of sensitive while also disturbing. Although it has been met with controversy as well, as some critics have questioned the director's motivation for turning this real story into a film. There were also apparently several walkouts and screaming matches during the film's screening and Q&A at Sundance. It currently has an 89 and 60% on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as a 3.2 on Letterboxd though, so overall its reception has been positive. Thank you so much to my patron Victor for requesting Compliance for me to review. He always gives me a couple of options to choose from, and after I checked this one out, I knew I had to cover it. And be sure to check out Victor's thoughts on this film over on his own channel, The Horror Movie Syllabus. I've left a link to his video featuring horror movies about mind games down below. And on that note, I do want to throw out a pretty big content warning for this video and the film itself. It's not a traditional horror movie in the sense it's trying to scare you, but what happens on screen can be pretty hard to watch. The film itself has a variety of sexual assault that takes place, both on screen and off screen. Pretty much any of that footage will be either blurred or excluded from my review, but it will be discussed. So please just be mindful of your own tolerance as we proceed. But with all that said, it's probably time we get started. Please go read up on your rights after this video because we're watching Compliance. The movie opens with a massive,
inspired by true events,
card before we meet Sandra, the manager of a fast food restaurant called Chickwich. She's getting a last-minute ingredient drop-off, which the delivery driver is not happy about. He demeans her and questions her ability to manage a restaurant, and we learn that they will be short on bacon and pickles for the day. Sandra meets with her shift team that morning, informing them that somebody failed to close the freezer door last night. They lost $1,500 of inventory, which is why they needed the last-minute drop-off. There's also a sickness going around, so basically every station will be short-staffed as well. It's gonna be a busy Friday night, so it'll be all hands on deck. Now we get to know the various employees. Most importantly, there is Becky, a young woman who works at the register. She believes that Sandra blames her for leaving the freezer open, and she and assistant manager Marty discuss their various boyfriends. Sandra tries to participate in the gossip, sharing that her boyfriend Van might be proposing soon. She also shares that Van and her sext each other to keep things exciting, and she listens as the women laugh behind her back. We also meet groundskeeper and technician Harold, who is heading out but will be back tonight. We've also got too tired to give a shit Connie and too young, wild, and free to give a shit Kevin. The restaurant's beginning to fill up, and Sandra gets a call from boyfriend Van. He's a contractor and he'll be drinking beers with the boys tonight. Hell yeah, brother. Her routine employee scolding is interrupted by an unexpected call from the police. An officer has their regional manager, Robbie, on the other line, and the officer says that an employee was caught on camera stealing money from a customer's purse. He describes a young blonde woman who Sandra identifies as Becky. Officer Daniels has a customer at their station filing a report of the theft and says that units will be arriving shortly to arrest Becky as part of a bigger investigation. He says Robbie said she would be trustworthy in handling the situation until they arrive, and she agrees to help. She pulls Becky to the back office and puts her on the phone with Officer Daniels, who says they have a victim and video footage to back up the claim. Becky denies this accusation, and the officer tells her to calm down before being handed back to Sandra. At the request of Daniels, Sandra checks her pockets and confiscates her cell phone and purse. She finds nothing, so Daniels has Sandra keep Becky in the back office until units can retrieve her. He can tell Sandra is hesitant about all of this, and the officer reassures her that he is responsible for the situation and wouldn't ask her to do anything he wouldn't do himself. Becky is asked to explain herself, and Daniels continuously argues her claims of innocence and tells her to fess up. She doesn't seem to understand the gravity of her situation, and he tells her to address him as Sir from now on. He tells her to do whatever Sandra tells her to do from now on as well. He tells Sandra that they have two options from here. Either officers drag Becky downtown and book her, or Sandra can conduct a strip search in the office. Sandra is obviously uncomfortable with this idea, but Daniels argues that this would save Becky a lot of time, money, and keep her out of the system. She presents these options to Becky, who reluctantly agrees to the strip search. She requests that Marty be present as well, and while Daniels is hesitant, he says that Robbie approves the second supervisor. While he has her alone, the officer makes it out like Sandra is the real victim here, and he asks her to take it easy on her. He quickly switches from supportive to condescending, blaming her for the situation that she's created. He also asks if she has any siblings who have been in trouble with the law, and when she mentions her brother, he confirms that he is in bigger trouble than ever. It's time for the search, and Sandra finds nothing in Becky's uniform or undershirt. Daniel says that they will have to check her bra and panties as well, since that's where thieves usually hide their cash. Marty is against this but relents, and Becky strips down to nothing. Marty kindly grabs her an apron to cover up, and Sandra shares that there's no money to be found. Daniels makes her spread her cheeks to make sure there isn't any cash in the crack, and tells Sandra to bag all of Becky's clothes and belongings and store them in her car until the officers arrive. She is hella confused by this request, but Daniel says this will keep Becky from snatching the money from any secret compartments that she's hiding it in. This still sounds bizarre to the women, and Sandra asks when the officers are actually coming. Daniels decides to fill Sandra in on the larger investigation Becky is involved in, claiming that her brother is illegally growing and selling marijuana. They believe Becky is involved, and this may be an opportunity to bring her in and get a confession. Her clothes may also have forensic proof of the weed, which is the real reason they need her clothes. Sandra drops the evidence off in her car, and the officer thanks her for her great police work. Sandra is increasingly needed out front though, and Daniels asks if there is a male employee who can watch Becky while the police are on their way. Her feelings of sympathy towards Becky have also shifted to frustration, and she grabs Kevin to watch her. She poorly fills him in about the situation, and he's clearly uncomfortable as Sandra hands him the phone. So this officer is probably sounding pretty fucking shady, right? Well, that's because he isn't an officer at all. It's just some dipshit in his living room. I'm gonna continue to call him Daniels, but that definitely isn't his real name. Kevin lets it slip that Sandra mentioned Becky's brother, who is his friend, has been arrested. He also comes to Becky's defense, arguing that he didn't see any theft. Regardless, Daniels tells him that he is going to have to search her body for the missing money. He finds this whole situation absolutely fucked and refuses. He tells Sandra he wants nothing to do with this, but fails to express exactly what was requested of him. She thinks he was simply put there to watch her, and Daniels commends her for being able to deal with such difficult employees. He does scold her for spilling the tea about Becky's brother, though. They still can't send an officer over to help because of course, and without any free employees to watch her, Officer Daniels suggests that her not-so-fiancé come help. Sandra finds this quite odd, but agrees to call him, so now Van has found himself wrapped up in this. He's a couple of beers in, and Daniels builds some man-to-man rapport with him. But once Sandra is gone, he once again tries to initiate a body search. Sandra returns with drinks and Van expresses his concerns, but once again fails to explain what is being asked of him. She leaves, and Daniels threatens to take Becky in if she keeps resisting. He tells her that her last hope is to let Van inspect her with no further resistance. She removes the apron and hands it over to Van, and Daniels asks for important information like the size of her nipples. Next, Becky is forced to turn around and bend over for a cavity search, with the added instruction to call Van Sir as well. Daniels and Van confirm that she's shaved, and they then have the poor woman do jumping jacks to dislodge the money. Kevin has texted around and learned that Becky's brother isn't even in town, and Sandra somehow misses that her boyfriend is giving Becky an up-close vaginal exam when she walks in. Increasingly frustrated by the situation, she yells at Becky when she asks for help. Daniels realizes he only has 1 minute left on his prepaid phone, so he suddenly races against the clock to add more time. He manages to stay on the line, and Kevin continues to express his concerns. Now Daniels wants Van to give Becky a spanking for her insubordination, and the sick fuck also tells her she'll have to do something nice for Van as a thank you for all of his hard work. After a pep talk from Daniels, Van puts Becky over his lap and gives her a hard, long spanking. And as his thank you for assisting the police, Becky is told to give Van a blowjob. After his rape is completed, Van is left speechless, and when Sandra returns, he fucking bolts. Devastated by what he's done, he calls a friend and tells him he did something bad. Becky realizes that everything that's happened here is on camera, and maintenance guy Harold conveniently returns, so now he's stuck waiting with her. But unlike the other men before him, Harold says no to the officer's disgusting requests and immediately informs Sandra. Finally using her fucking brain, Sandra calls up Robbie, the regional manager. He obviously has no idea what she's talking about, and when Daniels is confronted, he makes a joke before hanging up. An actual police officer, Detective Niels, arrives at the Chick Witch and questions the employees, and the police collect all of the security footage. He asks Becky why she didn't say no when asked to take her clothes off, but the poor woman had no idea that was even an option. Officer Pervert puts away his playthings and greets his young daughter as she returns home that night. Oh god. The police investigation leads them to discovering that he wasn't local, he was using a calling card. They also realize an identical case took place at a Wendy's in Boston just 2 weeks earlier. The perpetrator was using prepaid phones so they wouldn't be traced to anyone, but they could locate the store that he purchased the calling cards at. The man paid cash, but they do have him and his car on video. Turns out Officer Daniels is a goddamn telemarketer, so he also swindles people over the phone for a living. Becky lawyers up and considers suing Sandra, but she's advised to bring a suit to the corporation itself. Sandra is interviewed for a Dateline-type TV show, and we learn that she is now single and unemployed. The host asks if she feels responsible for what happened to Becky, to which Sandra says she was doing what she thought was right. He asks why the million bizarre, inappropriate, and clearly illegal procedures and questions didn't set off alarms, but while she found it strange, Officer Daniels always seemed to have an explanation. She argues that she is a victim in this as well, and even argues that Becky wasn't begging for help and that she agreed to what was done to her. They pull up the footage of Becky literally begging her for help, at which point her lawyer pulls the plug on the interview. The movie ends with several closing cards sharing that over 70 similar cases were reported before this man was finally arrested. And that's Compliance. Oh wow, this was a lot. I can't say it's a film I enjoyed watching, but that's also probably a good thing considering the circumstances. This is not a movie that you should walk away feeling good from. It's meant to get under your skin and make you feel absolutely vile for participating in it. It's also an absolutely infuriating watch. To see so many people who have no idea what their rights are and to watch them blindly obey these disgusting orders makes me want to jump through the screen. If I didn't know better, I would say this plot is too ridiculous to believe, but the reality is this film is very closely based on real cases that happened. The real incident that this film borrows the most from took place in 2004, when an 18-year-old employee at a McDonald's in Kentucky was detained, stripped, and sexually assaulted on the instructions of a caller pretending to be a policeman. The following investigation found evidence of similar calls going back an entire decade. A man was connected to and arrested for the calls, but he was never convicted due to a lack of evidence. The McDonald's manager received a year's probation, and her fiancé, who helped guard the employee, pleaded guilty to sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, and unlawful imprisonment, and got a 5-year jail sentence. As for the victim, in 2007, a jury ordered McDonald's to pay her more than $5 million. But of course, the evil company appealed, and she eventually settled for an undisclosed sum. I am glad to say that the invention of social media, and especially programs like Instagram and TikTok, have been heavily used by people to really highlight what our rights are and what to deal with when we're in some kind of legal situation. I feel like it would be a lot harder today to not get caught super quickly doing this, but also to get anybody to go along with these instructions. But this story is a testament to just how far people will go when they think they're doing something that is right, especially when they're being told to do so by an authority figure. There is a whole list of the various calls and the events that took place on Wikipedia, and as I read them, it became clear that the film borrowed from several of the most severe reports. The worst part is that many of the victims were underage teenage girls, which makes their inability to say no to their bosses and the police make a lot more sense. On Letterboxd, I've seen reviews range from half a star all the way up to 5 for things as simple as the film's unpleasant nature, and then more complex reasons like its themes and purpose for existing. People have questioned what Zobel's motives were for turning these real events into a dramatized film, which is something that comes up pretty frequently with based on true event films. Some people are put off by the director making himself the person who decides that we see Becky's boobs but not her vagina, for example. From what I can tell, their argument was that if the film's intention was to be a non-artistic, play-by-play retelling of these events in order to be informational, that the film really should have gone as far as possible and shown everything, or that it could have gotten by with not showing anything. Some felt that it was a little too in the middle and trying to take creative liberties. And that is a subject I'm still debating and grappling with, but at the moment I feel like the film tackled the necessary amount of gratuity and exploitation while not taking things too far. I do think showing a bit of what happened is necessary to really hammer home the severity of what took place. Others felt this film as inadvertently convincing audiences that poor people are stupid, thinking that we'll conflate a few specific people as representatives for all fast food employees. I can see where those arguments are coming from as well, but after sitting on this film for a couple of weeks, I'm just not sure I totally agree with that sentiment either. Sure, many of the employees are portrayed to be pretty vapid and gullible, but I never felt that they were meant to be outright unintelligent. The movie could have tried to make Becky super sweet and likable and shown her to be really distraught and upset during these events, but I think that that would have made things too easy. When people read or see stories involving victims, they are so quick to drop their support the moment they learn that the victims aren't these picture-perfect little angels. Oh, he does drugs, he deserves to be homeless. Oh, he ran from the cops, he deserves to be shot. Becky really isn't fleshed out at all, but for this movie, she shouldn't need to be. All I need to know is that she is a human being and doesn't deserve what is happening to her. Vapid teenagers don't deserve bad things. Working class people don't deserve bad things. Uneducated and unintelligent people don't deserve bad things. But getting back to the actual qualities of the film itself, this thing is really well made. There aren't any real big set pieces or action sequences, but the fact it was made for just $250,000 is really impressive. All the actors turn in strong performances. Pat Healy in particular does a great job portraying this absolute scumbag. Dreama Walker and Ann Dowd are great as well, both bringing intense mixes of emotions to the film. The cinematography also emphasizes the claustrophobia of the space and the situation in the office. But as much as Pat Healy does well in this role, I kind of wish we never saw the caller on the other line. I think keeping his position more ambiguous would have helped make Sandra and everyone else's decisions a bit more understandable. It's easy to assume or deduce that this guy's not a cop, but I think it would have been more effective for us to be a little unsure as well until the final moment. All in all though, I think each of you will have a different experience and opinion on Compliance. It's a difficult, unpleasant film, and all of that is by design. It shows off some of the worst of humanity while also bringing out the audience's own sense of superiority and intelligence. Everyone wants to believe that they wouldn't fall for this, or at the very least wouldn't take it this far, but people across the country are manipulated by politicians, police officers, their bosses, their parents, and many other forces that hold power over them every day. I'm not suggesting that many of us would fall for this particular scam, but have you ever done something that you felt was wrong because your boss or someone above you told you to? I know that I have. Well, that's kind of a downer note to end it on, but that's about it. Thank you again to my patron Victor for requesting Compliance for me to review. I can always trust you to give me some really engaging films to tackle on the channel. And everyone, be sure to go check out Victor's channel, The Horror Movie Syllabus, as well. But what did y'all think of Compliance? Let me know down below, and be sure to join me in 2 weeks as we check out Phantasm Ravager. Thank you all so much for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Compliance. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks, y'all.